back, guys. So, as always, I'm going to begin this one with a spoiler-free review before going into a full spoiler recap. But, God, okay. Normally, I give the episode a grade, but I'm honestly at a loss right now. I have no idea what I'm feeling. I just finished watching, and I'm just, blah. I don't know that I remember an episode of television that has left me feeling so conflicted. I think the episode was well done. I was pretty engaged in the story for most of the time, but I don't know how I'm feeling right now. I'm all over the place with my thoughts on this one, and it's hard to talk about without going into spoilers. In these review portions, I've talked a lot about tone and genre because this show has varied so much from episode to episode. But this one, well, it just felt like an epic season finale. Like, all of the storylines that we've been following were brought to fruition in this episode, and like that's what it was for, right? Like that's what the genre felt like. It felt like a season finale genre, if that's a thing. It was exciting and it was engaging, but other than like a rather shocking moment that is probably the root of my confusion, this episode didn't have the emotional resonance of, say, Jigaboo, what I think of as the Emmett Till episode, or Gumiho, the Korean episode. Those episodes stuck with me, like, emotionally for days. And while the last episode, the Tulsa Riots episode, didn't really resonate with me very strongly, I know from my comments that it did with a lot of people. And I can see it, I think that episode was not as well executed as it could have been. But okay, the point I'm making here is that this episode was good, but not particularly emotional for me. Even the first episode had more emotional resonance with me than this one. But this one was very exciting, so... Okay, if I have to give it a grade, and I guess I have to because that's the format that I apparently have decided on, I think I'm going to have to settle on a B. But honestly, if you ask me tomorrow, I might have a different answer. I'm really super conflicted. Okay, so now I'm going to go into the full spoiler recap. If you haven't watched the episode, stop now, watch it, and come back. So we begin this episode with our crew bringing Dee back into the house, and she's all, ghost girled up again. But once again, weirdly, she doesn't look nearly as creepy as the original ghost girls. I honestly don't know what it is. She just looks like she's just got weird makeup on, and they looked like something crafted from like one of my actual nightmares. But anyway, okay, they lay her down on the bed and Tick begins reading in the language of Adam, and the book of names just opens on its own to a page that has the same symbol that is actually like the Tick family birthmark or something, and then Tick passes out and then so does Letty. So yeah, that doesn't seem good for whatever it is that they were planning. We then get into that dream sequence that we keep seeing with like running through the burning house, but this time it's like super obvious special effects, so it's making it clear that this is not a normal dream. Hannah, Tick's ancestor, turns to him as she reaches the door, as she's done every single time, but this time we actually hear what she says. She says, "The answer is in your blood." Letty also is in a dream, but she's back at the house from the last episode, and the woman that she watched burn to death tells her not to worry, that Tick's baby that she's carrying brought her to this place. She's there because Tick unbound the book of names, and so now they have to learn about the book. Hannah explains how she used the book to put a spell on her and her descendants to keep her bloodline hidden from people who would use them for magic. This involves the birthmarks, so yeah, it was magical. I thought so. Anyway, okay, Tick asks for her help, telling her about Dee and that he unbound the book to save her, but Hannah tells him that he's gonna save them all. Tick then finds himself back at his home, and it's all, lit red to let us know that this is magical, this isn't real, and his mother appears, and he has a very touching reunion with her that totally had me, like, replaying, what's that book? Love You Forever by Robert Munsch. It was playing in my head, and I actually kind of got all teary. So this moment was a bit emotional, I guess. But as he lays on her lap, he asks if he knows what Hannah asked of him, and she says yeah. And he cries as he says that he doesn't want to die. So at this point, I'm realizing that he obviously has to die in this episode, some sort of sacrifice. But I'm wondering at this point if it's going to be a permanent death or not. And I can tell you that personally, I was kind of hoping that it would be permanent. I keep mentioning this over and over again, but I've been having trouble thinking of him as a hero ever since the Gumiho episode. He's a murderer, and he's paid no consequence for it. I mean, other than feeling super bad about it, but like, you don't get away with murder because you feel bad, I know that in real life, in every war, there are probably people who did get away with shit like that, but to show us what he did, and then to have him to continue to be played up as a hero, it's hard for me to swallow. So yeah, I don't hate Tick. I haven't gotten that far, but him dying in this episode, like as a sacrifice, it would just make sense to me. But anyway, okay, back to the scene. She tells him basically that sacrifice gives him purpose, and that she sees both of his father figures in him. Over with Letty, she's getting a crash course in like performing spells from the other lady, and then they are joined by Tick and his mother. They stand around the bed and they begin to say a spell in this dream world to heal Dee, and it starts to work in the waking world. Dee is returning to normal, but her arm, it stays dead. And this, okay. In the last episode, when Christina did her spell and Dee's arm was fine, I actually thought, oh, okay, I guess I was wrong about that. Because I had remembered that Tick, when he went to the future and he got the book, the Lovecraft Country book, he said that a woman with a robot arm gave it to him. And so I had thought that this was maybe Dee. But then her arm was restored when Christina did her spell, so I thought that I was wrong, but now it's still dead, and now I kind of wish that I had mentioned it last week when I thought of it, but I didn't. Whatever. We switch to the middle of an argument between Tick and Montrose. Tick saying that they need to do something called a binding spell, and they need to do it soon because they need to use the power from Christina's spell against her. This is something that Hannah has apparently been working on for a century. Montrose is against it because he doesn't want Tick to die, like it says in the book from the future, but Tick just says that the book is wrong, that is just one of many possible futures. Tick and Letty go into the basement and we hear that they have a monster locked in the basement. So that must be the monster from 2 episodes ago, I think. They take the elevator down to the tunnels, and then they go back to that secret room under the museum from, okay, what was that, episode 4? It was the Indiana Jones episode. Anyway, they make a salt circle, and they draw some symbols on it, and they start a spell to summon Titus, the founder of the Order. Magical stuff starts to happen, and then Titus appears, and is somewhat confused. Hannah also appears and confronts him, and Tick tries to attack him from behind, but he's, rebuffed. He manages to, apparate, I guess, into the middle of the street and appears to Christina, causing her to have a car accident. And I'm just going to point out here, she seems to be genuinely concerned for Ruby's safety here. But of course, the point of this scene is actually that Titus manages to let her know that the other group has got the Book of Names, finally, before he's, whisked back to the circle where all of Tick's ancestors are there now, and they're all saying the spell, so Tick can subdue Titus and then cut some flesh out of his chest. Ugh. Titus fades, and they continue the spell, and I think it's interesting to note that apparently the language of Adam has clicks in it, and clicks do not appear in any European, by which I mean any white, languages, only in African languages and in one specific indigenous language from Australia. I'm also going to point out that my girl, Journey Smollett, can do these clicks amazingly well.
Sanuran udo, makhona.
Tick, not so much. No shade to him, because neither can I. Back at the house, Hippolyta, who is still rocking the blue hair, makes some food for Dee, but Dee is angry. Angry that her mother left her for several weeks, apparently. Hippolyta acknowledges this, but says that she left so that she could become what and who Dee imagined her to be. And I'm honestly not sure if Hippolyta thought this was going to make things better, because it doesn't make any sense. Did she actually think that this was something Dee would have wanted or asked for? Oh, I really want my mom to go off and have a 2-century-old adventure so that she can... I don't know. But I guess whatever, it's the truth. Back in the garage, they are making plans to get to Artem for the equinox, and Letty outlines what the ancestors said, that they need to connect all of the three bodies to bind Christina. And I have to admit, honestly, at this point, I had no idea whose bodies they were talking about here. Christina shows up at the garage in yet another fabulous dress, and she tries to explain that none of this is personal for her, which, she's planning to kill Tick, so that is kind of personal, but what she means is that his death would just be a consequence of what she's planning. It's not her goal. And she can't think of another way to do it with the tools that she has, but now that she knows he has the book, she says that if he gives it to her, she will leave him and his family alone. And again, I actually believe her, but Tick refuses, and she leaves in a huff, removing Letty's invulnerability spell as she goes. Letty and Tick drive back to Letty's house, and we see that a black family has moved across the street. So I guess hooray for white flight. Anyway, Tick calls the hotel where Jia is staying, and then we switch to the hotel where we see her being hit on by a creepy white guy who he guesses that she's from Japan. And if you know anything about Korea and its history, you'll know why this made me laugh, because there really isn't much else he could have said at this point, especially at this point in history, that would have been more quickly guaranteed to make her hate him. But whatever. Anyway, she responds in Korean, and I didn't realize that they were going to have her translate it like seconds later, so I just rewound this several times to see if I could translate it myself, and I got pretty damn close, considering that they were using a grammar that I don't know. I'm pretty proud of myself. My translation was, "Do you want to have sex with me and die?" But her translation, which is probably the accurate one, was, "Would you be willing to die to fuck me?" And it's the "would you be willing." That's a grammar that I don't know how to use in Korean. But either way, whatever it was enough to get him to leave. Tick comes in and apologizes for being a complete ass before, saying he knows that she came to help him. But she admits that she kind of came to help herself too. She's been feeling kind of numb since the death of her mother recently, and she worries that she's losing the humanity that she had gained. But he explains that this is a normal part of the grieving process. It's a very human reaction. Letty and Ruby meet at her mother's grave, and Letty finally explains that, she missed her mother's funeral because she was in jail. She then shows Ruby the Book of Names and explains that they are planning to bind Christina, and they need a part of her body in order to do it. And Ruby is the only one who can get close enough to her to get it. At the house, we see Dee scribbling with her right hand on a newspaper that reads something like "an all-white jury acquits Emmett Till's murderers" or something. Yeah. Okay, so aside from the fucked up headline that really happened in history and whatever, okay, we see that it's Dee's dominant hand that is dead. And so that's not good, because she was an artist. But her mom slides a comic under the door that she drew. She apparently learned how to draw on her journey, and she wants to teach Dee how to draw. But Dee, with her dead arm, is, skeptical, but Hippolyta's got something up her sleeve. At Christina's house, Ruby asks Christina about the spell, and Christina shows her her notes. She starts to explain about, the elements of a spell, specifically the body, and we see the wheels turning in Ruby's head. Still not sure if she's going to betray Christina or not. And Christina is not sure if her spell is going to work, but Ruby reassures her and then kisses her. And I rejoice because a lady-on-lady love scene. Yay! And then it switches immediately to Tick in a church getting ready to be baptized. No love scene, just a kiss. I was beaver damned by a baptism. Anyway, Letty's there too, so I guess they're getting baptized together, and then they start kissing, and the same me that just moments before was all, "Ooh, I want to see these two sexy ladies do sexy things to each other," is all, "Hey, you can't make out in church, especially not before getting baptized. That's not cool." I am a mess of contradictions. Anyway, what I assume is the next day, we see our group all piling into Woody, which is George's car, and our group has grown. It is now Tick, Letty, Montrose, Hippolyta, Dee, and Gia. So they are, stacked. And just as they are about to leave, Ruby shows up with a vial of some fluids. some of Christina's body. And seriously, we're not going to get to see that at all, are we? Like, come on, this is HBO. Why didn't we get to see that? Well, whatever. Ruby joins them in the car, and we get a nice little sing-along and completely random aside. But, okay. Living here in Korea, I am constantly being asked if I'm homesick. And, okay, Canada's just a really, really big country. Even when I lived in Canada, to see my mother would have required a 5-hour plane ride. Many of my friends live in cities that require hours drive. So while I do miss my friends, I don't miss them in any way that feels different than just living in a different city from them in Canada. And with things like FaceTime and Zoom, you know, a lot of that is alleviated. But there are things that I miss from being back home, and one of them is singing in the car. I miss getting in my car, putting on my favorite songs, and just belting them out at the top of my lungs. Y'all don't know how precious that is. But anyway, okay, back to the show. They reach Artem at sundown, which doesn't seem smart given what they know about the monsters, but I guess they know what they're doing now. Tick pulls out that piece of Titus's flesh that he cut and the vial of Christina's fluid, and he just eats them. Ew. Montrose is laying down a salt trail, or what I guess is more like a salt barrier, as Tick makes his way to the ruins of the manor house. As he enters the ruins, a bunch of white people in really old-fashioned, even for this time, clothes come out and start guiding him on past some ominous-looking metal contraption. Around the property, everyone else, including Ruby now, are drawing symbols in blood around the property line. And Ruby asks what will happen if Christina starts her spell early, but Letty says she won't because she needs the moon to be at its highest peak. Ruby looks thoughtful and says that she finally understands the pull of family. And this causes Letty to pull up, and she basically says, you know, Ruby's sus. And Ruby admits that, yeah, she's not Ruby, she's Christina. She caught Ruby trying to steal the potion for Letty. We see Jia look up from where she was painting symbols, and she curses in Korean as she sees a group of people approaching them. Upstairs, Letty asks what happened to Ruby, and Christina says that Ruby made her promise not to harm Letty, but now it's Letty's fault that Ruby is dead. And this is fucked up, but I have to say that I don't actually believe that Ruby is dead. I think she's probably just in a coma, which is bad, but I don't think that Christina would have killed her. But okay, Letty sure as hell did, and she punches Ruby in the face, and at the same time a full-on brawl is happening downstairs with these villagers with actual literal pitchforks, and Gia, Montrose, and Hippolyta. The brawl in the tower ends with Christina throwing Letty out the tower window, and she lands on her back and looks pretty damn dead, that's harm, I guess. So that is a broken promise. The brawl with the others ended with the villagers just overwhelming them. It was way overpowered there. Dee was left alone in the car, but okay, she's there reading comic books alone with a flashlight, and she gets startled by a twig snapping, but she doesn't see anything, and then she starts reading out loud as the camera gets closer and closer to the car, so, we know something's approaching, and then there are a bunch of twigs snapping, and all I'm thinking at this point is, what the hell is wrong with these people? Why is Dee here and not safe at home? Why is she alone in the fucking car? Do none of you remember that she is a child? Dee hears that chittering noise that we remember from the first episode and ducks, and we see something rush past the window, so yeah, monsters. They left her alone in the car with monsters all around her. Tick is being strapped into the machine, and Christina appears, having changed, both her body and her dress. And she tells Tick that hijacking the spell was a good idea, and it might have worked if they had just left Ruby out of it. The rest of the crew is brought into the area, except for Letty, and Tick asks where she is. Christina doesn't answer, and Tick, assumes she's dead and begins to weep. In the car, the child that was left alone there by a group of adults who knew full well that this area was full of monsters, well, she's scared as monsters begin to tear up the trees around her, and then one of them starts to smash into the car, but it's fought off by another monster, which is the one that, it's Tick's monster, which I'm assuming that Tick, this is a plan of theirs, but I I don't know what the point, like why they could have just left her at home. I don't get this. Anyway, okay. The spell begins, and Christina slashes Tick's arm and, releases like a torrent of blood. And then the camera flashes between him, Letty on the ground, and his friends and family watching this happen. Christina drinks some of his blood and like leans back in ecstasy. And then power begins to flow from Tick into Christina. And as it does, Letty wakes up as well and sees the invulnerability spell is back on her flesh somehow. And I'm gonna say somehow because I don't understand this. Maybe if you get this, explain it to me. I don't get how the invulnerability spell was back on Letty. This magic system is very soft, so it just happens, cool, but the logic of what happened here doesn't make sense to me, but okay. She begins to run towards the manor, and we see Christina chanting and drinking in whatever power she's getting from Tick. Letty arrives just as the spell seems to be finishing and locks eyes with Tick, who is very relieved to see that she's alive, and he even smiles, even in the midst of what's happening to him. She whispers that she loves him, and he falls forward, dead. Christina moans in ecstasy as she revels in her victory, but then a blade bursts through her stomach, and we see Letty behind her holding a sword or something, and she begins chanting in the language of Adam. Christina pulls the blade out and the wound heals, but Letty keeps chanting, and these dark clouds form behind Christina. Christina says Letty's too late, she's immortal now, and the potion didn't have Christina's blood in it, so they aren't connected. Hippolyta says this out loud, and Gia flashes back to her meeting with the shaman, telling her that the shaman told her she hadn't become one with the darkness yet. Gia says that she needs to get into that cloud of darkness as Letty keeps chanting, and she runs into the cloud, and as she enters it, the tails shoot out of her eyes. One reaches out to Christina and the other to Tick. Letty keeps chanting as Gia lifts them, both into the air, and we see flashes from both of their lives. We see the baptism. We see Christina catching Ruby stealing the potion. Tick introducing Dee to the monster, Christina with a comatose Ruby, Tick handing a letter for his father to Hippolyta, and then everything explodes and fades to black. Christina wakes up buried in the rubble and begins chanting, but it doesn't have any effect, and realizes that she has been bound from using magic. And Letty informs her that it's not just her, it's every single white person in the world. Magic is for, I guess, non-white people now. Montrose approaches Tick's body and, begs him, wake up, but Tick is gone. And Hippolyta hands him the letter. And we hear Tick's voice reading the letter, apologize for keeping this last secret from him. The letter is continued as they carry Tick's body off of the property, and he asks his father to teach his son new ways of living instead of, repeating these unhealthy patterns. He has a chance to be the kind of father he always wanted to be, now with Tick's son. Back at the manor, Christina groans under the rubble, and we see a monster approach, and I assumed that she was about to be eaten here, but the monster is there with Dee. Christina begs Dee to save her, and Dee shrugs off her jacket and reveals her robot arm, and I felt vindicated, but whatever. Dee grabs Christina by the neck, and we hear the robotic arm machine whirring. And my thoughts at this moment were, does anyone actually want to see a child commit murder? Because I don't. And then she does. She literally explodes Christina's neck with her robot arm. And then she looks triumphantly at the monster as it howls in front of the full moon, an admittedly very cool shot. And I don't know what to feel. It is that last moment, of course, where Dee murders Christina, and yes, Christina deserved it. I kind of liked her as a character. I'm sad to see her go, but yes, she deserved death in the logic of this world. But Dee commits cold-blooded murder here. And I know she is grieving the loss of her friend and is probably reeling from the injustice of the fact that the murderers got off scot-free. And yeah, get used to that, Dee. But Well, you may have noticed that I have a bit of an issue with murder and characters I like being murderers. And this one is worse because Dee is a child, which is a double-edged sword because I am way more inclined to give her a chance for redemption than I was with Tick. But on the other side, I'm thinking she's going to be super scarred for the rest of her life for this. And I know she's going to have a long life because she's got to be there to hand Tick the book with her robot arm. And I mean, it's murder, so she should be, right? Like, murder should scar you. I don't know where they're going with this. It would have been so easy for them to just have another monster eat Christina or have her die in the rubble. This is a very deliberate and specific choice, and I'm curious, but also kind of worried about what's going to happen next. But, like, that tells you that I'm in, right? Like, I'm hoping for another season so I can know. So this finale did its job. I'm just not sure about how it did it, and I'm honestly still not sure how I feel. But okay, I'm gonna stop going back and forth now and just end this recap. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and join my Discord and let's hash things out there. And if you want to support me, one of the best ways to do that is through Patreon. Links to both of those will be in the description below. And as always, like, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye!